Super matchups are always a delight, and today's contenders are no different. While fans have argued about which superheroes could defeat each other for generations, the gold standard of superhero strength in these friendly arguments is almost always Superman. With a seemingly endless array of abilities and a bottomless power reserve, it's difficult to think of a character who could reasonably give the Man of Steel a serious challenge in a fair fight, other than maybe Thor, Marvel's incredible god of thunder. With his Asgardian abilities and mystically enchanted hammer, Mjolnir, Thor is a literal god who regularly fights and defeats adversaries far stronger than himself. As the god of thunder is one of Marvel's mightiest Avengers, and Superman is the most powerful member of the Justice League, there is much debate regarding which one would come out on top in the ultimate Superman vs. Thor fight. So, let's find out whether we can decide on a winner between these two powerhouses, shall we? Chapter 1: Similarities. Before we begin with the comparisons, let's take a look at the similarities between both these characters. The Man of Steel and the God of Thunder share a lot. They can fly, are strong enough to lift complete cities, and have super speed. Also, if you think about it, they're both aliens when compared to humans. Even if Thor is seen as a god, Asgard is a planet just like Krypton. One more similarity is that both these dudes had a meek alter ego. While Thor was Dr. Donald Blake, Superman hid on Earth as the mild-mannered journalist Clark Kent. Over the years, the similarities between Superman and Thor have grown more noticeable, but they still share the title of one of the most powerful heroes of their respective universes. This led creators to consider them as counterparts to each other. They even merged during the Unlimited Access arc by Carl Kessel, Pat Olive, Al Williamson, Gregory Wright, and Jim Novak. This DC/Marvel crossover follows different fusions of DC and Marvel heroes, the most noticeable one being Thor-El, a Thor-Superman merge. He possesses the abilities of both Superman and Thor, so he's unarguably one of the strongest characters in the series. Since Thor and Superman's history of similarities has tied them forever, it makes sense for fans to pit them against each other in who would win conversations. Chapter 2: Who is stronger? By most accounts, Superman seemingly outclasses Thor regarding raw strength, especially in earlier versions of the DC universe. He's pulled planets, punched people into orbit, and performed wild feats of strength. Superman's powers are effectively unmatched in his home universe, increasing with his proximity to Earth's sun. Mind you once again, that I'm considering all media for both comparisons, especially the comics. Now, Thor has displayed a considerable amount of strength as well. During his fight with Beta Ray Bill, the Asgardians' raw strength destroyed an entire planet. He's punched out Galactus and the Phoenix Force, both vastly powerful cosmic entities. He held up Asgard, resisted a black hole's gravity, leg-pressed 1 million tons, and even controlled a symbiote to fight Galactus. While Superman is most likely still the stronger of the two, the divide between the two heroes is not nearly as broad as one might suspect. Chapter 3: Who's more powerful? Regarding superpowers, Superman has a far more versatile set of abilities. With moves like freeze breath and heat vision alongside his super strength, Superman has a wider arsenal of tools. However, Thor regularly fights frost giants and has endured energy blasts from gods like Celestials. While Superman's abilities might hurt Thor, they wouldn't necessarily put him down in one shot like Saitama from One Punch Man. Besides his strength and other Asgardian abilities, Thor has mastery over lightning. As the god of thunder, he can control and manipulate magical lightning bolts and other weather conditions. While these abilities are nothing to sneeze at for any opponent, Thor's lightning powers could be especially effective against Superman. The Man of Steel still conducts electricity. Although he isn't vulnerable to lightning, it affects him anyway, so it could slow him down in a fight. As you all know, encounters like these are decided by the closest of margins. Chapter 4: Can Thor actually beat Superman? Superman's well-documented vulnerability to magic could be the key to a possible defeat at the hands of Thor. That weakness is one of the main reasons that Shazam and Black Adam, mystical heroes who rely on magical lightning, have posed problems for Superman in the past. Thor's powers are derived from magic, his Asgardian lineage, and his enchanted hammer Mjolnir. Thanks to the God Tempest, this incredible weapon gives the God of Thunder a crucial advantage in battle. While Superman could potentially overpower Thor, blows rendered by the mystical Mjolnir would likely seriously damage the Kryptonian hero. If we add Stormbreaker to the plot, then it could even get more interesting. With his super speed, the Man of Steel could probably avoid the Thunder God's lightning, but this is not a guarantee, since Thor isn't exactly a tortoise himself. Additionally, Superman rarely goes all out against opponents, especially in friendly fights, so he most likely will not be fighting at full strength. Thor is the complete opposite and always fights to win, often entering a berserker rage when things get too intense. Combined with his mystical abilities, that mindset could give the mighty Avenger the edge he needs to emerge victorious from what would surely be an epic confrontation. Chapter 5. The Man of Steel has already won before. Despite all the evidence that Thor could have a fair chance at defeating Superman, the latter soundly defeated the former when the two heroes faced one another. Their most meaningful interaction came when the Marvel and DC universes collided in Kurt Busiek and George Perez's JLA/Avengers in 2003. At the end of that crossover's first issue, Thor hurled his hammer Mjolnir into Superman's face as the League and the Avengers confronted one another. As a full-on battle between the two teams erupted in the following issue, the fight between Superman and Thor took center stage, and Superman wielded Mjolnir. Yes, you heard that right. Superman is worthy. Both heroes pushed themselves to the limit as their teams fought over a cosmic cube in the Savage Land as part of a multiversal contest. Thor withstood the full might of Superman's heat vision as the pair traded blows at full strength. But when Thor tried to knock Superman out with his hammer, Superman turned the tables and put down the God of Thunder with one punch. The Man of Steel then stated that the Asgardian was the toughest opponent he had ever faced in battle. Tom Brevoort said that the decision was made because that is what the authors genuinely believed would have happened. On his blog blah blah blog, Comics I Don't Apologize For, he wrote, and I quote, "While Thor got in a great full-page shot that closed out the first issue, and his struggle with Superman ran for almost the full duration of the issue, in the end, Superman laid Thor low. This was the outcome as decided at a meeting down in Florida at which Kurt Busiek, George Perez, myself and DC editor Dan Raspler blocked out the story. And it wasn't done because of politics, or because of some need for a specific quid pro quo. It happened because the four people in that room felt that that's what would happen given the circumstances, and the thrust of the story we were building. So, as per historical evidence, we already have a winner. However, let's just flesh through all the details, just to be sure." Chapter 6. Referencing the proxy heroes. It's always a good idea to compare multiple fights between the same opponents and see what patterns emerge and who tends to be victorious more often. However, thanks to Thor and Superman coming from rival comic publishers, there aren't enough examples of them fighting to compare to one another. So, to get some results anyway, one must turn to proxy heroes. This is not an official term, but it's a fair explanation for the role other heroes with a similar power set will play in this argument. On both the Marvel and DC sides of things, there are several characters that share similarities with a rival company's character. Think of Hawkeye and Green Arrow, Quicksilver and the Flash, Daredevil and Batman, and the list goes on. This isn't to imply that one character is always a knockoff or play on the other, although in some cases, it very clearly is. Having said that, these characters are comparable when it comes to powers and abilities. As such, one can look at how Thor has fared against Hyperion, who is a big, muscly, flying man with super speed, who can shoot energy beams from his eyes. We can also consider how Superman has done against Shazam, who is a mythology-based hero with super strength, magic and lightning powers, who can revert to a weaker version of himself with a simple task. An alternate version of Hyperion has been seen to destroy the universe's Thor, and Hyperion was stated as technically stronger than Thor in the Heroes Reborn event. However, Thor did ultimately beat Hyperion in that very same event. Again, the situations created by the writer and artist call for different results in order to tell the specific story being shared. On the other end, Superman has beaten Shazam on a couple of occasions. But in some notable fights, Clarke did so by covering Billy Batson's mouth when he returned to his kid form, preventing him from powering back. This option wouldn't exist with Thor unless the Donald Blake rules were in play, and Thor was separated from Mjolnir long enough to revert him to that mortal form, and Superman was able to prevent him from getting Mjolnir back. But Shazam and Thor are certainly not a one-to-one comparison, so some of that balances out. Chapter 7. What would the girls do? Before I continue, it should be made clear from the beginning that Kara Zor-El's Supergirl and Jane Foster's Mighty Thor are not just female versions of Superman and Thor Odinson, but whole and unique characters in their own rights. Furthermore, they do not necessarily represent their male counterparts exactly. Of course, this statement is based on quotes from creators like Stan Lee, and can change depending on what the writer and artist want. That being said, it is worth looking at how the two heroes compare, as it can lend some valuable context to the Superman vs. Thor debate, as well as give fans more evidence to consider when it comes to this Asgardian vs. Kryptonian conundrum. Kara stands at 5 feet and 5 inches tall, whereas Jane, when powered up, stands at 5 feet and 9 inches tall. Additionally, Kara weighs 120 pounds, while a powered-up Jane weighs 450 pounds, according to the Marvel Wiki. Like with their male counterparts, the Asgardian definitely bests the Kryptonian when it comes to these physical stats. But once again, that's never the whole story. One of the biggest differences between the two, and a difference that wouldn't typically apply to the Superman vs. Thor debate, is that Kara has had her powers and abilities since she first came to Earth when she was a teenager, while Jane was an adult the first time she lifted Mjolnir. Kara certainly bests Jane when it comes to experience, though Superman and Thor both grew up with their powers. Interestingly, Kara and Thor Odinson share the similarity of having grown up in the foreign world that gave them their powers, while Clarke and Jane had to learn about it as they went along. That is one of the few similarities wherein the counterparts are flipped. Ultimately, a comparison between Supergirl and the mighty Thor would need its own article, but the information here is helpful context when looking at the Thor vs. Superman debate. Chapter 8. Conclusion. While Thor is one of the mightiest gods in the Marvel Universe, he is still no match for the unparalleled power of Superman. Having said that, even the Man of Steel admitted that Thor could be almost at his same level. Maybe the outcome of their battle would be different in other circumstances. It is true that Superman and Thor both have compelling arguments and have been proven to be a relatively even match. However, Superman ultimately would win the day, unless Thor had kryptonite on hand. Extrapolating the powers and abilities of both, Superman's do seem to dominate, especially since they all come from him, rather than many coming from tools like Mjolnir or the Odin Force for Thor. As always though, different situations from different creators will lead to different results. The joy of comics is getting to see so many different writers and artists play with their characters differently, leading to new and exciting situations to read. All of this is to say that my conclusion could be proven wrong one day by a new comic, which is then contradicted decades later in another story. Like, share, and subscribe if you like these topics and want me to cover more of them. Feel free to share some suggestions in the comments below. Okay then, I'll see you soon.